Hello everyone, and welcome to this video, which is in our Human Game series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and we're taking a look at a very interesting game played around the New Year at the Rilton Cup in Stockholm between Leon Livaic and Matthew Wadsworth, English International Master. It features the King's Indian Attack, which is one of my favourite openings. I've played it quite a lot, and also played a lot of practice games against the engines, so always interesting to see it happen in practice. So what was the lead up to this position? So it's e4 c5, knight f3 e6, and then d3. So instead of playing d4 going into the open Sicilian, you're going to play the move d3, and the knight's going to come to d2, and you're going to put a kingside fianchetto on the board. So knight c6, g3, knight f6, bishop g2. Now you often see this through the French move order, and then black's already played d7 to d5. In this Sicilian move order, black could play other structures, like play the pawn to d6, for example. But d5 is pretty common, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So knight bd2, bishop e7, castles. Many ways to play. You can play for a quick b6 and bishop b7, and just delay castling. Castling kingside. Maybe you can even think about castling queenside. But this is a very common idea as well. Just b5, rook e1, castles. And now really you get the typical King's Indian Attack scenario. White plays e5 in this position. Knight d7, knight f1, a5, h4, bishop a6. And I think now is probably quite a good moment just to have a look at the contours of the position, because they're they're just going to really affect the rest of the game from now on. So, white has got a pawn on e5. It's this typical attacking pawn on e5. It takes away the f6 square from a black piece. So in principle, the black king side, in particular the h7 square, is a little bit weakened. There's no knight on f6 to defend it. However, in a normal position, when you play e5, your bishop would be on the b1 h7 diagonal, but here in this case, your bishop's on g2, so it's sort of pointing towards the queen side. So in terms of attacking potential against black's king side, not particularly obvious. However, you do have other ideas, and I think one main idea is to start moving this rook's pawn up. Very well known from modern engine play, Alpha Zero, etc. But in this opening, this idea has existed for a very long time. And the key point is, if you get the pawn to h6, then it's going to weaken black's kingside dark squares. If black reacts, then white gets something else. Now, the really interesting thing about this structure is that we've got a pawn on e5, so white's got that central space, but white hasn't committed the other central pawns. So the pawn is on d3 rather than d4. So what that means is that black has some difficulties creating play against white's position. Normally, white would have a pawn on d4. You'd be attacking it with everything you've got as black. Here, it's some distance to engage the white position. And these positions, if you don't know them as black, they can be quite tricky to handle, because obviously white's play, is kind of directed more at the king side, at black's king. And black's got more sort of space on the queen side, but that's not where white's king is. So it can be a little bit scary. I think the most important thing to point out about this one is that the pawn on e5, is not defended by another white pawn. I mean, that's part of what white does in order to avoid having any central conflict. But that does mean that you need pieces to defend it. And, we're going to see in the game that a lot of black's defensive ideas, the ideas that the engines come up with, they're all based around the idea that, when white starts moving pieces into the attack, that this pawn on e5 can get left behind. And that's often a very important defensive resource for black. So how did the game continue? Knight 1 h2, very typical idea for white. This knight's coming into g4, and it'll support h5 to h6, and also hope to target this f6 square as well. Queen c7, attacking the pawn on e5, very common. Bishop f4, and now rook fc8. Now rook fc8, very interesting idea. I think it was originally an engine setup. and it's got many different ideas. I mean, first of all, you're going to have your rooks on either on A8, on B8, and C8. Two of the three there. So that's obviously going to help. The advance of the queenside pawns, which is really how you're going to create counterplay with black. Also, the fact that you've got the queen and the rook on the c-file means that this idea from black, which is quite typical, gains a little bit in strength. The idea is that after knight d4, obviously you're cramping white somewhat, and if you go knight takes d4, c takes d4, then the c2 square can be a little bit weak because we've got pressure along the c-file here. But there's another very subtle idea. The idea is that engines, especially Stockfish, and I think this is where this idea comes from, very, very good at using the queen as a sort of enormous bit of glue, really, to keep the defence together. And playing the rook to c8, that frees a path back to the king side for the black queen. So if ever you need some urgent shoring up of the king side there, then the black queen is available. So it's very flexible, mixing possible attacking scenarios and defensive scenarios as well. And we're going to see quite a few of those in the game. So what does white do? h5, and now this is a first crucial moment for black. How are you going to react? Are you going to allow this pawn to come to h6, or are you going to play h6 yourself? Those are the two choices. For the engine, there is no choice. The engines really don't like allowing white to get h5 to h6 in. In fact, if you put it on Stockfish, Stockfish's evaluation jumps 0.8 when white gets in h6. And, it's not about getting mated or anything like that. It's not about the fact that white is going to get imminently mated, even though there are quite a few threats that can come along with exploiting the f6 square, for example. But it's more about the fact that this pawn on h6 just makes black's position worse in a number of scenarios. So, for example, if lines get open, if files get open, then this black king on g8 is susceptible to a back rank mate. If we move forward to the ending, this pawn on h7 is going to be a huge weakness. We get a knight on g5. This pawn on h6 here is almost ready to queen. So it's all about worsening black's position in typical scenarios. And, the engines really, really hate this. So the engines will always play the move h6. But now what's interesting here is that this pawn on h6, it's always the thing about moving the rook's pawn forward. It's why it's what AlphaZero sort of showed us, and it's what all the other engines are doing nowadays as well. That simply moving a rook's pawn up the board, it's just like a low cost way of asking black some questions, and depending on black's answer, often that gives you an idea for your next plan. And with this sort of hook on h6, I don't know who coined that phrase, but I really like it. Now white's got a number of possibilities. I mean, there's ideas just with piece sacrifices against the h6 square, trying to expose the black king. Another interesting idea is to play g4 to g5, just to open up the g file, open up the black king side, and then in you go, basically. So there's a lot of interesting things there. So white played the move, I mean, g4 immediately is possible, but white played the move queen d2, which is also very sensible. Just lining up and just keeping flexible there. g4 to g5 still possible, knight to g4 also possible. And black could have done a number of things here. The engines were looking at stuff like a4 and b4 in particular. They're also quite keen on playing bishop b7 as well. I think probably the engines feel that the bishop should have been put on b7 straight away, although they don't particularly feel it makes a big difference. One interesting plan to look at is, let me just get a good exposition of that theme. It's after bishop b7, rook d1, knight d4. This is quite an interesting idea. Knight takes d4, c takes d4, rook e2 and a4, knight f3, and then b4. And actually for black, in this line, strangely enough, this pawn on d4, the engines just don't seem to be bothered at all. You go knight d4, you just fossilize the white queen side, a3, b3, and then you just sort of play actively like this, and essentially after in a sort of position like this, you're kind of at a standoff really, because black can just line up, play rook c3, rook c8, attack this pawn on c2 and tie you down. This knight isn't really going to be able to move very easily because it's got to defend this pawn on e5. So, white's kind of stuck, but also black's kind of stuck. I mean, there's a limit to how much power black can put against the white position. There's only this target on c2. You've only got 2 rooks. So, the one thing I'd never really liked about this plan knight d4 for black anyway was that, even if you got something like the ideal, it often felt really that you weren't going to get any more than a sort of a standoff draw really. So so a bit less keen on that sort of line, more keen on just keeping on going with b4 and a4 and b3. Instead of bishop b7, Matthew played the move queen d8, and this is, I guess, a little bit cautious in the sense that this knight d4 idea now is, put a bit on the back burner really, because you're no longer doubled on the c file. But the queen is heading back to give the king side some support, not a silly idea when you see this the queen and the bishop lining up against this. And it's also got actually a very subtle defensive idea, which is very easy for white to miss. And it actually turns out that this position is actually really concrete and crucial. Now I'm going to show you what white played and show you why that's a little mistake really. White played the move bishop h3, and essentially white is just taking his time before he starts striking, either taking on h6 or g4 to g5, and white's really keeping the options open about what he's going to do. But in this position the engine wanted to play knight f8, and already the engines are getting quite positive about black's position. And what is the big idea of this? The big idea is that you play knight f8, and after g4 you play the move knight h7, and all of black's protection now is stopping white from playing g4 to g5. I mean, if necessary you could even put a knight on g5 yourself. And actually the engines consider that the black is now clearly better in this position. They don't see any way for white to proceed, and black's going to start getting its own counterplay ready. So this is quite an interesting moment in actual fact. Actually the engines start abandoning any play that white's got on the king side and start playing a bit more normally on the centre. And what you also notice is that this knight coming round to h7 is also very good against any piece sacrifices that white might have. It's also helping to cover the king against that. So actually knight f8 is the kind of threat. So it means that in this position white should play g4. I'm always very, very interested when, in positions like this, you don't always realise that it's actually a concrete moment where you sort of say, yeah, I've got to be alert and I've got to, start the attack straight away. And always like it very much when the engines point out, a position like that where I wasn't even aware of it. And, it gets quite sharp here. B4 was one idea. G5 takes, knight takes. And now an absolutely crucial defense, and just remember this throughout the game because it's very, very important. The reason that this is not just winning for white, because in principle, it's starting to look very, very dangerous, right? The storm clouds are gathering. We're going to start coming in with pieces, rook over to g1, this sort of stuff. The reason this is not just like completely winning is because of this e5 square. We mentioned already that the e5 pawn needs pieces to protect it, and when white starts stretching, starts flexing on the king side, then the e5 pawn becomes weak, and it's very important to be alert to that. And this is one variation that the engines were looking at. Takes, queen d6, queen e3, rook f8. Looks a little bit uncomfortable for black to me, but the engines thought that this was pretty equal basically. Bishop h3, bishop c8, and then the engines were just actually taking on e5 and holding it like this. Yeah, again, I'm more comfortable with white in this position, but the engines thought that it was holding. This is quite, again, just in general, if you ask me always, who would I rather be in these positions in this opening, white or black? I'd much rather be white all the time. But it looks like this defensive idea, knight f8, is a really, really good one. Well, white played bishop h3 and black played b4. And again, well, you can understand, the engines are screaming for g4. That's the one that had to be played. And and then they're looking for c4 with counterplay. But you can imagine it's going to get quite sharp here. But white in this position played king h1, still taking a very deliberate approach to that. I mean, with king h1, you're freeing the rook to go to g1. And it sort of fits the feeling of a slow position, because there's no conflict in the center. But again, as the engines show, even the slowest positions can be very concrete. Now, the engines again really want knight f8 here, to be ready for g4 with knight h7. But Matthew played a4, and this is not a bad move at all there, but it's just very, very sharp, because now white can play the move g4. And now black should be attacking like crazy. And this is really where I think around this stage Matthew just lost track really of what he was doing here. And I think that really in this position that the really natural move and the move that you have to play is b3. Which is going to break open the white queen side, and after all, you're undermining this pawn, and this bishop is attacking the pawn on d3. But of course, what you really need to know, and really need to have, it's quite hard to be sure about that at the board, is that when white plays stuff with g5, you're going to be able to strike back on e5. And if you don't realise that, and the variations are quite difficult to calculate over the board, then then I can imagine that you're not going to go for this line. Because g5, we take on g5 takes, and then b takes c2, so undermining that, and that's quite nice actually. Rook g1, knight d takes e5, and because you've got this pawn on c2, because this pawn on d3 is weak, you are getting to the point as well where you could say, well, I could easily just start sacrificing a piece or something like that to break up the attack, because I've ruined this white structure so much. It could be could be pretty decent really. And actually there's a lot of ideas involving c1 queen. For example, if you go rook e1, then the engine was saying c1 queen, or did he say bishop actually? I think he said bishop, but that's just being cheeky really. Queen c1, knight takes d3, so forking this one and these as well. Well, we got some very sharp stuff here. Knight takes f7, knight takes c1, knight takes d8, knight takes d8, defending the pawn on e6. Bishop takes c1, and white's got compensation for the pawn. I mean, there's some weak pawns here, weak pawn here. We're going h6, but in principle, black is holding on quite decently. Starting with bishop f6, and we'll have rook a7 to defend laterally as well. Going back to knight d takes c5, we've also got a move like knight takes c6, and this is very dangerous indeed. Takes, king f8. The engines actually, their initial game just ended in a draw here, which sort of shows, how much better they can calculate than we can really. But h6 played, g6, very calm move there. For example, we've got bishop takes c5, knight takes c5, rook e1, bishop f6. f4, c1 queen, again this little distracting thing, and then this move bishop d3, which is very nice. This bishop getting active, it goes to e4 check, which is irritating, and it's also going to defend this g6 square as well. So takes, check, rook g2, bishop e5, and it's still a mess, but the engines thought that it was around equal. Again, I mean, I think you see the complexity of it, and you really see that by not really taking all measures against this g4 to g5 advance, we're into super sharp territory there. But again, it's this ability to hit the e5 pawn that's going to be your key defensive idea all the time. Bishop b7 is decent because after all, you've played king h1, you've put your bishop to h3, so putting the bishop on here is not going to be bad, but of course it is slower, and it does mean that white could actually play the move g5 here, and you've got to calculate it. But okay, I mean, h takes g5, knight takes g5. We can throw in d4, which is quite sensible, just looking for some discovered attack. F3, and now we take on e5 again. You know, the idea always being that bishop e5, I've got bishop takes g5 here. That's, you know, the key idea. So, you know, knight e6 takes. And, well, I mean, it starts getting quite sharp here. Rook takes c6, rook c7. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is, I wouldn't automatically be 100% sure that black's doing fine here. I mean, this king on g8 is quite weak, and white's going to open it further with h6. On the other hand, yeah, this king is not super either, and but there's some, you know, some very sharp tactics like bishop c8 when if the rook moves, we'll have stuff like queen h4. So yeah, I mean, again, you know, I wouldn't be very sure that I'm surviving this as black. It's only because the engine's telling me that it's possible that I believe it. But of course, you know, what we can do with black is move the king to h8 and the rook over to h7, and we're covering. But I mean, I think you can see again, you know, that even if black's doing fine, these variations are starting to get more and more scary for black. You know, but white played the move rook g1, you know, carrying on this incredibly deliberate build-up, and I imagine, yeah, I think that probably if you gave white a bit more time, he'd probably go rook e1 to defend this e5 pawn, and then play g5. But here, Matthew really lost track of things completely, I think, because this move knight d4 is really badly timed. You know, the point about knight d4 is that it was done to open up counterplay on the c file, and that's great. But you know, you've played the move queen d8, so you're really slow with that counterplay. And you know, in the meantime, I mean, you know, like this is all happening, and you know, the one glimmer of light you had, I mean, you move that bishop back to b7 on this long diagonal. You had was that you were, you know, sort of pointing against this king on h1, but you know, after knight d4, c takes d4, like this bishop is always going to be completely buried behind this pawn on d5. So, I mean, you know, kind of the counterplay that you're creating is not there, and the worst thing, of course, is that you've no longer got pressure against this e5 pawn. So now actually white can sort of start careering through, and yeah, and there's actually not very much you can do about it. I mean, the situation is kind of so bad that Stockfish is recommending bishop g5 in this position, not even taking the piece back on d4, but trying to put something in the way of the g file. So, you know, it shows how serious this mistake is. And again, it's, you know, it's a very typical plan. So you know that the black you know, knows some, you know, a reasonable amount about this position, but somehow it's just really, you know, mistimed and just not hitting the spot in terms of how black needs to defend here. So yeah, I mean, g5 would have been really strong here. It's actually not too intuitive that that this is so strong for white, but I mean, you're just going to chase this knight away, and you've got, you know, stuff like h6 to h7, knight g4, doubling up on the g file here. I mean, it's really huge, and black doesn't have any sort of counterplay at all. There is the idea of playing rook takes c2, which might have scared me a little bit. Queen f4 and then rook f2. The idea being that after queen f2 we go bishop g5, but yeah, again the engines are just saying rook f1 and knight g4, and how on earth are you stopping me from lining up against these guys? The question is, point is, you're not particularly. I mean, if you go bishop e3, this is the best defense, obviously looking for queen e3, d4 check, but we go queen g3, hitting e5 and g7, and well, you're going to lose another piece because you can't defend against queen g7 and also defend the knight. But it's not one of those positions where, you know, you automatically it looks like it's you know, an easy win somehow. It you know, it takes a while. You really have to look at the position and you say, oh yeah, you know, it really is that good. But you know, thoroughly understand white's idea here, knight f3, which consolidates e5 and then prepares g5. I mean, I think it fits in with the way that white played this game, which was you know, kind of very deliberate and slow moving somehow. But yeah, I mean, it's good enough because the counterplay that black's has, it's not really that much. So, well, black played b3. I mean, yeah, you have to start doing something. I mean, this is good, right? You've got to make something happen somehow. ab3, rook a8, bishop a8. Yeah, keeping the rook on the c file. That feels natural. Although that bishop on a8 is now, kind of really buried on a8. So c takes b3, and now simply, g5 is really, really, really huge, right? It's really dangerous. We're going to have, look at all those white pieces just concentrated against the black king. So black played bishop g5 here to stop the g pawn, giving up another pawn just to try and halt the advance. Actually the engines really were sort of choosing lots of ideas here. Knight takes g5 is more or less the only move that I would consider, but apparently even this is really strong. Knight e5, f4, knight d7, and then just knight f3. You're just playing very calmly, really. This pawn will disappear, and you're just going to start advancing your kingside pawns as well. Essentially, it's just that pieces like this are just so bad that the white's just got a massive positional advantage here and complete control. That's actually quite interesting. But this is I'm sure virtually every human player would play this. You get the two bishops, and you get a pawn, and you get a tempo as well. What could be wrong with that? So here black made another mistake. You needed to keep your queen close to the king side, and queen b6 was played. But again, it's a very natural counterplay move, and just in the human context, moves like this where you sort of kind of dare the opponent, find the win then, because I'm coming through quickly. They're often better than objectively better moves that don't give white a quick win but don't actually do very much. But here white could have played the move bishop f6, which would have been really, really strong. Obviously we're threatening queen g5. Something like g takes f6, we just go e takes f6, and queen g5 check is coming in, which is going to be quite painful. Knight f6 and takes was played, and then e5. This was an interesting idea from the engine, just to try and bring the queen across to defend. But then we go g5, rook d8, fg, and king g7, bishop f5, and we've just got h6 and g6 coming in. It's just impossible to stop these guys. So black's just completely lost, and again, this bishop completely buried on a8 behind this d pawn on d5, which is itself held by this pawn on d4. It's really bad news for black here. But bishop f4 was played. Not a bad move. Queen b3, g5. Pretty good moves, but obviously, we're 28 moves in, starting to get short of time. And the way that Matthew plays this with black, it just starts looking very messy, or starts feeling a bit messy for white. And in human games, that's basically how you lose control. And rook c2 was played, queen a5, and here Matthew sacked the piece with queen d3. I think a very good decision there. Takes knight f8, and then you just let white worry about what sort of counterplay is there. And there's some threats, right? There's queen h3, there's rook f2, there's checks. You've got a lot to think about. So bishop g3 played. That's a good move. It shields the bishop on h3 and defends the pawn on f2. That's quite a good way to do that. So queen f3 check played, king h2, and now d3. And the danger keeps on coming. That passed d pawn is going to be very, very dangerous indeed. But here white missed I think a very big chance here. Instead of d3, the engine wanted queen takes h5, and what's the reason for that? Well, the engine was afraid that white would play g6, and this is a really, I think if white finds this move, then I think probably you've got to say that he's really odds on to win this game, because once you've weakened up that black king side with two bishops, then a rook pointing on the g file, then the random tactics, they're always going to be in white's favour. They're never going to be in black's favour when you've got an open king with two bishops, a rook and queen attacking. It's just never going to be bad at all. So that would have been a really good idea. Queen a7 was played by white. Queen h5. And now this move, queen d4, and this one's slightly unfortunate, really. You're picking up the d pawn, but you're also releasing this this knight on h8, and again, it might not be sufficient in the engine world, but yeah, in the human world, getting short of time, I'm sure that knight h7 came as a rather unpleasant surprise here. This knight getting active, it looked passive, just forced to be next to the black king, and now it's coming out to g5, and I mean, if it gets there right, I mean, we're talking serious counterplay here. And this was really where I think White sort of bailed out at this stage and decided it's just got too much. I need to. I could even lose this if I'm not careful. But there was still a very good move here, which is bishop f4, defending the pawn on g5, and the queen's defending the pawn on f2. And if you go rook c4, I go queen e3, rook e4, and queen g3. It's a little bit awkward, but. Yeah, on the other hand, you're sort of keeping it all together. The one difficult thing is that after knight f8, coming round to g6, again, putting pressure, you do need to find this good idea, queen g4 and rook g4, and this looks unbelievably awkward, really. And I wouldn't intuitively think, yeah, this is going to be much better for White, but somehow you can extricate yourself, play the rook to d4, bishop to g4, just putting it under lock and key, and then eventually you're going to come round and you're going to win this d2 pawn, and well, then afterwards it's just a question of mopping up the pieces, really. For example, knight g6, you go bishop d1, knight e7, bishop f4, and you can look at playing rook d2 in this position. It's quite a lot, I don't know. I mean, it's if you're short of time, it's a lot to be sure about. I mean, White played queen g4, and yeah, Matthew played a slightly strange move. As it turned out, it was very good. I mean, I think personally, I would have just snapped the queens off and taken on g5, and then been pretty sure that this would work reasonably for me. And I mean, White's still better, obviously. I mean, that's not the question, but we're sort of we're going to get into this sort of position, and at some stage we're going to play f6 and possibly liquidate this pawn, or even just play g6 and just hang like this, and it's just very hard for White to make progress. So that would have been the temptation. Matthew played queen takes g5, which doesn't force White to take the queens off yet. So I don't know. I'm slightly unsure about whether White could have found something better in this position. But White took on g5, and this is perfect. You're actually a tempo up on that other line now. So bishop g2 played to keep the knight out of e4, but rook b2, rook d1, knight e4, and now we're even going to take the pawn on f2. So takes, rook e1, rook e2. And after this position, f4 was necessary to stop the pawn from queening. E takes f3, f5, and well, it's pretty clear that black is not going to lose this. E takes f6, gf6, king g4, and the game was agreed drawn. So yeah, I mean, what were the interesting points in that game? I mean, I thought the the opening concept, playing with queen d8, very, very interesting. Also following up with knight f8 to h7. I think this moment about when White plays h5, should black allow h6? The engines say absolutely not. I thought that was very interesting, and what I was very interested by was actually how concrete the position got. I mean, White played it in a very calm and say slow manner, and I didn't see anything wrong with that when I was watching the game. But actually, the engine's saying, well, you need to hurry. You need to get g4, g5 in as quickly as possible, or knight f8 to h7 will come in. And hadn't occurred to me that actually this position was actually quite concrete as well. And then I think, one of the key things in there in terms of defensive technique for black was the pawn on e5 is really important. White's attacking it with pieces. If White starts moving pieces towards the king side, you've got to be able to fight back with a knight takes e5 trick. And there are loads of them, it seems, and yeah, what black really did wrong was kind of got all the plans mixed up. Had the possibility of knight d4 early when you were lined up on the c file, didn't play it, and then played knight d4 later when actually that just really stopped all of black's counterplay. So would have been better if you're not gonna do anything to stop White's play on the king side, then just go like crazy on the queen side and start opening stuff up. But very, very interesting positions. I really like them. And, the lovely thing about modern engines is that, they used to be quite, dodgy in these sort of strategical positions. When the danger became clear on the king's side, then they defended like lunatics, of course. But it was really possible to get them into very dangerous situations before. Whereas now they just anticipate everything. There's prophylaxis, queen d8, knight f8 to h7. They're just seeing your threats before they even materialize. So very, very interesting. But definitely worth. I'd say, if you're a white player against the French or against the Sicilian, definitely worth adding, the King's Indian attack to your repertory. Easy to learn. Also take a couple of Fischer games as model games, just to inspire you, and then you're good to go. Very little theory, typical structures, and as you can see, I think Black's got more to worry about than White really. The only thing you have to remember as White is, a slow build-up can work, but in principle, try and go quickly. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed that. It's one of my favourite openings. So I hope that's been instructive. If you like the video, why not give a like, or subscribe to the channel, or even take a look at my new book, The Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, now available also as a Chessable course. Video with me talking lots and lots about engine games and showing you how to use your engines to prepare and to train with. And that was I think that's a really nice part of the book, and I recently did a masterclass just on that part of the book, and it was really, really popular. Really, it was sold out within a day or so. So it just shows, I think, that part of the book speaks to a lot of people and well worth looking at. So do take a look at that. But otherwise, thanks very much for watching, and hopefully see you at the next video. Thanks very much.